Hold on 1 second. Okay, there we go. Sorry about this, guys. Let's continue here. Okay. Okay. So, there we go. We did opening an oven on Shabbos. Now let's do closing an oven on Shabbos. At night, one must assume that food is not yet fully cooked and that closing the oven would cause it to cook further. Therefore, the Ramah holds that one may not even have a non-Jew close the oven. If one did close the oven, the food would become forbidden unless either the food had already reached Machal ben Drusai before the oven was closed, and B, one had a non-Jew close the oven. Okay, one who accepted Shabbos early may ask a non-Jew to perform most malachas, may nevertheless not ask a non-Jew to close the oven. If the food in the oven was fully cooked before Shabbos, but coals inside have not been removed or covered with ash, a Jew may not close the oven. He should have a non-Jew do so. By day, if there are no coals smoldering in the oven, a Jew may replace the plank on the mouth of the oven himself, but he may not seal it in place with pitch. If there are still coals smoldering, but not an actual fire, a Jew may not replace the plank so that it covers the mouth of the oven entirely. However, he may either put the plank back in such a way that a large area is still uncovered, and B, ask a non-Jew to replace it. And last point, if there is an actual fire burning in the oven, one may not replace the plank entirely, even if in a case of great need. However, one may still have a non-Jew close the oven. So oven, as it were, like what we know as pizza ovens today, where they replace the coals all day, and a plank was probably like a beam that they put the food on. So with electricity, it's probably, if there's enough electricity to cook the food, that would probably be a problem. So, but one would probably still have, as with all these questions, rather ask a competent Rof and someone with knowledge like you guys have access to.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kev. All right, we'll carry on with the Gemara show with this link. As soon as this link dies, we'll send another link, because my goal is to finish this particular daf, and we'll finish it. And I want to try as quickly as possible. I'm not going to drag it out. I haven't got the voice for it, so I'm going to go as quickly. Generally, we did say Saturday night an hour, but I'm happy to do it for 40 minutes if we can achieve it within 40 minutes. Believe me. So let's get started. We discussed the idea. We basically discussed the idea on Thursday night about Adim Zomamim, whose testimony was contradicted before they were exposed as Zomamim. Okay. Just gonna guess Arthur's muted himself. That's cool. As long as he's listening, I'm happy. All right. So guys, remember we discussed a case where conspiring witnesses whose testimony was contradicted before they were exposed as Zomamim. So what we said is that Rava made a statement that witnesses who were first contradicted and later rendered Zomamim are executed. Okay? For the contradiction is the beginning of Hazama, which is the reciprocal penalty. It is merely the process that has not been completed. So what we are saying in a nutshell is as follows, is that generally a buyer has the opposite view. And that is that any contradiction between two sets of witnesses cancels each other out. And then if there are witnesses that testify to the fact that one set of witnesses was not at that event because they were with them elsewhere or they were spotted elsewhere, we can't apply the reciprocal penalty because they already invalidated each other out. So we used an example, and we said that in Santon City, first set of witnesses testified that Reuven killed Shimon. Then basically there was a second set of witnesses that said that Reuven did not kill Shimon, so they contradict each other. So generally, the principle is if the witnesses contradict each other, we cannot believe either, because we're not going to execute somebody in the defendant unless the testimony is consistent and can be verified by evidence. So therefore, if they contradicting each other, and then another set of witnesses come and say the first set of witnesses that actually testified to the fact that a murder had that testified to the murder that had taken place in Santon City, they couldn't have testified to such a thing because they were with the other couple at a restaurant near Eastgate. And therefore, they are proved to be Eidim Zomamim. But they should not get the reciprocal penalty of Eidim Zomamim, because the first set of witnesses and the second set of witnesses cancel each other out in terms of testimony, and therefore both their testimony was invalidated before the third set came and said that the first set accusing this defendant of murder couldn't have witnessed a murder since they were not there. So what we are saying is, according to Abaya, that the two sets of witnesses that have contradictory testimony cancel each other out. And then if Eidim Zomamim say that the conspiring witnesses that were in a different place at the time accused this defendant of murder, we cannot apply the reciprocal penalty because the witnesses were invalidated before by the contradiction of other witnesses before they were proven to be conspiring witnesses. They were just proven to be have inaccuracies in their testimony compared to the others. So we don't believe either. Then they invalidated, therefore you can't apply the reciprocal penalty. So Rav is saying that you can. And the reason being is that the Hazama process, the reciprocal penalty process, occurs when they first were shown to be inconsistent. And it doesn't cancel them out. This just further proves the inconsistency. But not only that they were inconsistent, but in fact now that they're liars. Apart from being inconsistent, they were actually liars. And therefore, they don't cancel each other out, and the Hazama reciprocal penalty is implemented. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. Kevin, before I give the case going forward, that's the bottom line we did on Thursday night, that's now. Would Arthur like to tell us Abaya and Rava's opinion? Arthur, you've listened to Rabbi Carton. I know you're on top of your game. Talk to me.
I haven't listened to Rabbi Carton for quite a while, to be quite honest.
Okay. How come, mate? You've just been feeling lousy?
Yeah, I haven't, how can I say? Sort of
You've
like,
been bunking.
kind of like,
I'll be editing this out, don't worry. Let's start to edit out.
tired. Not really an excuse, just
Okay.
sometimes I have a lack of interest and sometimes I'm interested, like, depending on what's happening.
Okay, that's honest.
So
That's
I'll stick
honest.
to that. I'm trying my best not to give up yet.
Okay, well, I can tell you one thing, though. Because Rabbi Cohen goes through a daf and a half in an hour, within a 7-day period of what we take for a daf, because we do daf a shavua, you can go through Rabbi Cohen once. I didn't say you have to be ahead. You can do it once.
So, Damon, are you saying what you just said, to a summary what you just said about the Hazama?
I want to know what Rav holds, what Rava holds, and Abaya holds. I want to know their opinions.
Well, the Hazama is that if the Zomamim testify and they were in a different location, that's what the Hazama is about.
I know that, but what's the case we're dealing with here? What's Rava's opinion and Abaya's opinion? It's very important because there's no point in going through the whole case.
No facts. I can never tell. I battle with telling which Rav said this. And the facts I know. It's just it's very different.
All right, well, you don't have to put a name to it. What are the two different opinions?
If I get it, I'll try. I mean,
okay, just try. This is not an interrogation, and I know. Actually understand Arthur's point of view that sometimes one's more interested than others. All I'm saying is that Rabbi Cohen, since what we do in a week, he does in he does it in about 40 minutes because he does a duff and a half in 55. That maybe after, if you do it once, just in the beginning, it'll make you familiar with the stuff to put 40 minutes in. That's all I'm saying with Rabbi Code while you're working. Once.
No. Just sometimes I just haven't had any, how can I say?
Interest or motivation.
Yeah, I've just been totally, either I'm very tired. I've been working literally about 90 hours a week on average, if not more.
I know that, mate. I'm just saying.
I just can't even listen. I can barely listen to regular stuff without falling asleep.
I understand, not a problem. So
I put on something, I'm out in 10 minutes. If I want to move
I understand. It's not a motivational thing. It's an energy resource thing, actually.
Yeah.
I get it. It's not a problem. But I can see because you used to be on top of your game, and I understand that you're fatigued. I get it. So, guys, I'm going to say it one more time. It's no good going through a case for about the next hour or two, not tonight, don't worry, over soon 2 or 3 days, because if you don't get the bottom line, that's why I'm trying now a different method. I'm giving you the bottom line first, so you understand the case going ahead, and then summarizing it. It's the best way to do it. It's my own method. Jesus, that didn't sound humble. But
Damon method, yeah, good.
But do you understand what I'm saying? So, Gavin, give it over with the Bayern rubber.
No, you give it over, Damon. I can't. Not in the position.
Oh, come
Not
on,
today.
I've got 3 sick and late people here. It can't be.
No, I've got such brain fog. I'm just keeping up. I can't give. I know what's going on, but I can't. You should have asked me on Thursday. I think I gave you the answer on Thursday. I knew it did.
All right.
I'd rather just listen to you properly again. I'm trying to focus. I just heard you, but I'm just barely coping here.
All right. Let me just tell you what I'm saying. I'm going to simplify it. Okay, and then I'm going to get much more complicated. The simple version is as follows. Okay. So, guys, the simple version is as follows, okay? Rava said witnesses who were first contradicted and later rendered Zomamim, conspiring witnesses, are executed. So we don't understand how that is possible, because if there is one set of witnesses that said Reuven killed Shimon in Samson City, by Samson City in the parking lot, and the second set of witnesses that said, yes, Reuven beat Shimon, but Shimon was screaming afterwards, and then he crawled to his car and drove out, and he disappeared from town. That's why you can't find his body. It's not that he's dead and they hid his body. It's that he's like laying low for a while. Then you've got 2 different contradicting witnesses that should cancel each other out, because neither of them can agree on any part of the testament. So since they disqualify each other out, when there are later witnesses that prove that the witnesses that accuse Shimon of killing, of Reuven of killing Shimon, we cannot apply the reciprocal death penalty to the first set of witnesses, because they already cancelled out by the second that said murder never took place. So does that make sense? They cancelled each other out. So when later, just hang on, Kev, 1 sec. When later witnesses came and said the first set couldn't have seen Reuven kill Shimon in the parking lot of Samson City, they're not given the reciprocal death penalty, because the second set of witnesses already said that there was no murder that took place. So let's clear up one issue. There's a difference. When is the Hazamah reciprocal penalty implemented? When they are proven to be conspiring as opposed to confused. What does that mean? Is that when a set of witnesses are said to be at a different location, that's not confusion. That's taking an innocent person, lying that you were there and lying he committed a crime. It's one thing if there are 2 sets of events and you see one guy beating up another and you think he's dead, and the other group said he actually didn't die, and that could be where they just disagree in terms of what happened to the guy. That is confusion, or perhaps contradiction of testimony, but it is not proof that they never witnessed the event. And when you don't witness an event and say you witnessed an event, that's conspiracy to have that person suffer a penalty. And therefore, since the first set of witnesses said that Reuven killed Shimon in the parking lot of Stanton City, and the second set said I only beat him up very badly, then in that case, they should cancel each other out. So then when the third set of witnesses come and say that the first set couldn't have witnessed the murder because they were in Eastgate with them having lunch, then the first set cannot get the death penalty in this case for saying that Reuven killed Shimon, because they were already discredited by the second pair that said that Reuven only beat up Shimon. Because what could have happened with this first pair is they could have heard through the grapevine and decided to get on it because they don't like Reuven. But because they already cancelled each other out, they are invalidated as witnesses, and therefore, since they're invalidated, they cannot be receiving the reciprocal penalty, because we do not accept their testimony enough to convict the defendant. Since their testimony is not accepted in order to reach a verdict, it is not valid testimony, and therefore you cannot give the reciprocal penalty on non-valid testimony because they were invalidated as witnesses by the contradicting second pair. So by the time the third pair said that they were never there to witness the event in Santon because they were in Eastgate, then we cannot give them the reciprocal penalty. That's according to Rava. Abaya said, that's according to Abaya. Rava said you can give them the death penalty. The reason being is that if you have contradicting witnesses, they haven't cancelled it out. If anything, the second set of witnesses is going like the third set. The second set said Reuven did not kill Shimon. Okay? The third set said the first witnesses never viewed the murder. And therefore, the second set of witnesses never contradicted the third set that accused the first set of being Eidim Zomamim. But we have to say, according to Rava, that it is merely that the process has not been completed, for the contradiction is the beginning of Hazamah. So all Rava is saying is that we are seeing immediately a pattern here that the first set of witnesses cannot be trusted, as validated by the second set said that Reuven only beat Shimon. And when the third pair said that the first set could not witness the murder, it's because they were with them in Eastgate and not in Santon. It says this just goes to prove that these, in fact, are consistent. The second pair disqualifying the first pair, and the third set saying the first pair were not even at that location. So therefore, we work out the hazama, the reciprocal penalty, at the beginning of the process where their testimony is inconsistent, whereas the buyer is saying, no, it's not like that. The first set and the second set argue. It invalidates each other's testimony, and since it's invalidated, when the third set said the first set couldn't have witnessed the murder, you can't trial him for the reciprocal penalty because the defendant was let off the hook at the time. The first set of witnesses and second set of witnesses contradicted each other.
Yeah, got it now. Thanks.
Okay. Now, I'm going to start with the case. Can Kevin or Arthur give it over? Arthur certainly not. Was talking.
Just a question, Damon.
Sure.
Is it, if the Shimon actually may not have been murdered, can the Zomamim, can they actually still receive death sentence?
Absolutely.
Or does he have to have been, because they accusing somebody who will get a death sentence?
That's exactly.
They're making an accusation.
Yeah. If he was murdered, what they're testifying to is true.
So, Damon, I just want to see if I understand a little bit here, okay?
Sure.
The gist of the story is, from what I can understand, is if the guy misinforms, that doesn't actually lie, but actually doesn't see something. He thought he saw something, but he didn't, okay? He doesn't pay the what's name. But if he actually is purposely lying and trying to get the person prosecuted for death, he receives death penalty or whatever it is, the extra amount. That's it in a nutshell.
That's the basis of it in a nutshell. It's absolutely correct. We're looking at the application here. So what we are saying is that the first set of witnesses, it could be that they see Reuven beating Shimon and think he died from his injuries. Second set said he didn't die because he's in ICU but he was taken to Pretoria, so that's why you don't see him around. It's not that they hit the body.
So obviously, then in that case, they can't prosecute the guy for murder.
Correct.
But
so
he
because
didn't
he hasn't died. So the thing of it is, they cancel each other's testimony out.
Yeah.
And therefore, a buyer says that if a third set of witnesses came and say that the first set of witnesses could never have viewed Ruvain killing Shimon, even though he didn't, but their accusation of it, because they were with them in Eastgate and not with Sandton, we can't apply the reciprocal death penalty, because even though they really wanted to get this guy killed, and he was innocent, because maybe they didn't like him, maybe he was the bully or gangster around town, and they really figured the world would be better off without him. I can understand that. But the thing of it is, you can't apply the reciprocal death penalty because their testimony was invalidated by the second set of witnesses automatically. And since it was invalidated, you can't successfully apply the reciprocal penalty when it's thrown out of court because they were invalidated as witnesses. So that's
it's basically out. It's not even
correct. So that is the opinion of a buyer. Rava says you can give them the reciprocal death penalty because the second set of witnesses have already agreed with the third that there was no death that took place. So it's not cancelling each other out. This just proves that the first set are it's collaborating with the third set that had never transpired as a death. So in other words, it doesn't cancel each other out. So as far as Rav is concerned, we look at the Hazamah testimony, not at the point where they cancel each other out, but where the second set are already contradicting the first set. And therefore Rav is saying you can see that the first set are already caught out lying. But you can't do anything about it. But by the time the third set came and said they were with us at Eastgate, for sure we know that the second set were correct, that it only proves that the third set are consistent, and therefore the first set does get the death penalty because they didn't cancel each other out. It's just proving the case of the third set. That's what Rava is saying. So, guys, one of the things you must remember is in order for Adam Zomamim to take effect, firstly, the witnesses cannot invalidate each other before the third set comes along. That's number one. Number two, if you want to say that the first set are contradicting each other, according to Rava, then you have to say that the Hazamah process starts when they're contradicting each other. And that doesn't cancel them out. It only proves the consistency of the lying witnesses. That's all, okay? And the bottom line is that once a victim, once a defendant is, the verdict is sentenced, but it hasn't been carried out, you can give a reciprocal penalty. But if there was no verdict given out, you can't give the reciprocal penalty because at that point there's invalidation, okay? Now, if the sentence is carried out, you can't apply Adam Zomamim to the reciprocal penalty because that's the limitation, is that if it goes through the court system and it actually worked out either an execution or lashes or monetary compensation, and it not only was the verdict passed, but it's in Makos 5b, but it in fact went all the way to being carried out, then the Adam Zomamim don't get the reciprocal penalty, but in the next one they're going to cook, believe me. Because then there's no teshuva part for them in that point. It's gone even beyond the verdict. So verdict has to take place. But the sentence can't be carried out at that point. Okay. So in other words, the contradiction is in essence similar to Hazamah, in that both the cases that we've dealt with, the original testimony is repudiated by the later witnesses. It doesn't subject the contradicted witnesses to punishment, for it's an incomplete act of repudiation. In it lacks the additional feature associated with Hazamah of removing the witnesses from the scene of the alleged incident. Because it's only, guys, when they're removed from the scene by other sets of witnesses that it proves that they were not incorrect in their testimony, but actually conspiring. Because if they were never at that location, there cannot be a conspiracy. That's a clear indication of conspiracy. So the other witnesses come and state the first witnesses were elsewhere, We view the contradicting witnesses as having begun the Hazama process, according to Rava, and the later witnesses as completing the process begun by the contradicting witnesses. So the testimony of the original witnesses was therefore never relevant before the Hazama process began. That's how Rava sees it in a nutshell. All right, let's go to the case without any further ado. So Rava sought support for his ruling from the Brisa. Rava said, from where do I know to say this? For it was taught in the Brisa, if witnesses say, we testify about so-and-so, that he blinded the eye of his slave, and then he knocked out his tooth. And indeed the master claims this as well. And the witnesses were subject and then rendered Eidim Zomamim. They pay the value of the eye to the slave. Okay, so what we are saying is that the Torah, if you look at it in Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 26 and 27, you're dealing with the case here that if one knocks out the eye or tooth of his Canaanite slave, the slave goes free. That's the first premise of this case. So in our case, the witnesses testified that the master knocked out the slave's eye and then his tooth. So as such, the injury to his eye renders him a free man. And the subsequent injury to the tooth was inflicted upon him after he gained his freedom, and therefore it entitles him to damages for the tooth. Okay? So that's what we're dealing with here. So they pay the value of the eye to the slave. Rava now analyzes the situation. What's the case under discussion? If you're going to say, as stated in the Brisa, that there's no other set of witnesses involved in this case besides the two sets mentioned in the Brisa, then how does the slave rule that they pay the value of the eye to the slave? Because when they brought him out from freedom by testifying that the master blinded his eye, why should they have to pay him for the value of his eye? Because the witnesses found to be Zomamim pay only for what they sought to deprive someone of by their false testimony, guys. So in this case, they didn't attempt to deprive the slave of anything. On the contrary, the effect of their false testimony would have been able to set the slave free. So why should they have to pay the slave for the value of the eye? Okay. So after they brought him out of freedom, and furthermore, if you assume that case, that they should have to pay the value of the entire slave to the master, for basically they conspired by their false testimony to deprive him of his slave. And furthermore, how does the Brisa say, and indeed the master claims this as well? The master then satisfied with the testimony, surely not, for without their testimony he would keep his slave and not be liable to any damages, and now that they testified, he loses his slave and has to pay them the value of the tooth. So what's the Gemara saying here in a nutshell? God, Art, you want to give it to me, or you zonked out still? Kabb, you want to give it to me?
I'll try and okay, I actually went over this today and the other day, briefly, not on the same depth as you. So the Zomamim, maybe they're not, they're usually testifying against would have been the slave owner, not that he did it.
Yes,
so they're not against the slave, even though
correct.
They may have lost an eye or tooth. So why should they pay for the loss of the eye to compensate for that? Is that the gist?
There are three questions. Correct. Kevin answered the first one beautifully. So
the tooth, obviously, and then the slave should go free.
So there are three parts to it. So what Rava is basically saying is that if you look at this Brisa, it doesn't make any sense. The first reason it doesn't make any sense is that basically, why should they owe the slave if they were accused of false testimony and they were caught out as being, if they were caught out as being conspiring witnesses? Why should they have to pay the slave for his eye? Okay, because at the end of the day, the slave got his freedom for it. What do you mean they owe the slave for his loss of his eye? If anything, it was exactly as Kevin said, to the slave's benefit. By this false testimony, they go free. The slave goes free. So he should be super happy with the Eidim Zomamim. So why would you have to owe the slave anything? Okay, that's the first issue that Rava is saying. Second issue that Rava is saying is, why would the master be happy with this testimony? He's losing a slave. If anything, the false witnesses should owe the master back the value of the slave, because they sought to set this slave free, and therefore the master is out one slave and he deserves the financial compensation. So why does the Brisa say that the master isn't repaid for the value of the slave? And why would the slave be happy with, why would the master be happy with this? Because it says, indeed, the master claims this as well. So Rava is saying the master couldn't have claimed it as well, because without the testimony of the false witnesses, why would he be stupid enough to lose an asset? Why would he concur if it was false? That was the problem of that. And what do you mean that he has to pay the value of a tooth? What does this have to do with anything? So these are the 3 points that Rav is bringing against this brisa when you read it superficially. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, Art, what are the 2 questions, since you were speaking to everybody else? Can you...
The family's talking to me, asking me questions. This is what happens when you have a family around you.
You would never know that.
All right, so. En malasot, I think, as you say it in Hebrew. Who gives a flying fig? All right, let's go on. All right, so Gavin, do you see the 2 questions? What's the 2 questions?
Asking me on the wrong day, but I'll give it a shot. So
the bar
no, I've got to
set that high.
Nothing I can do.
Gavin, the bar hasn't been set that high. You'll be doing fine.
Yeah, and I'm not high either, so it doesn't make sense. The questions is why is the Rabbi wants to know why is the God, I can't communicate when I'm like this, Damon. It's impossible. I know what's going on.
All right, that's fine.
Just you know off the hook.
All right,
I know what's going on, but I can't.
That's fine, as long as you know. All right, let's go on. So what we say, Rava is actually saying you can't look at the case like this in the Brisa. If you look at it literally, why the heck would the false witnesses have to pay the slave back for his eye? Because of their false testimony, Arthur, he got his freedom. He should be grateful. What do you mean you owe the slave for an eye that he lost? He actually, this false witnesses gave him his freedom. And why would the master be concurring with the statement of the false witnesses? He loses a slave. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So Rava says you can't read it literally. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the slave lost his eye anyway.
Okay, so we're going to get to that. But I'm saying if you just look at the superficial wording in the Brisa, Rava said it doesn't make sense because the slave should be happy he's gained his freedom on false testimony. In other words, he's got no beef against these false witnesses. If anything, they're trying to free him.
So yeah, but Damon, on the other hand, the slave lost. I mean, he might have been a slave, but he has all the comforts. Everything's paid for him. Now he has to go find work, and I mean, it's not. I mean, it sounds fantastic, but if you've been a slave for a long time, you know, when you got a food and a place to rest, and now suddenly you're not a slave anymore.
Okay, so Arthur's got a good point.
Great, but it's not if you don't have a place to live and eat.
You've got a great point if it's a Jewish slave, but you don't have a great point if it's a Canaanite slave, because it's talking here about a Canaanite slave, which is equivalent to the horses in the barn. God doesn't have first-class treatment. It's not like a Jewish slave where it's for you indentured servitude because of theft, where you get to share your master's pillow. If there's only one pillow, you get to have it. And you get to be treated like a member of the family and be shown with respect. The Canaanites were not the Jewish people's friends. So when you enslaved them, they were certainly no better than the second-hand cattle, believe me. They slept with the animals. I'm sure if they got a couple of meals a day, it was a lot. So you are completely right, Arthur, with the Jewish slave, but that's why they mention here Canaanite slave. Well spotted, by the way. The Gemara talks about it in its commentaries. Excellent question. Well spotted. That's exactly why it talks about a Canaanite slave. So, guys, Rava says this is how you got to read it. The Bryce is referring to a case where 2 witnesses came earlier and said the master knocked out the slave's tooth and then blinded his eye, for which the master, in addition to setting the slave free, must pay him the value of an eye. Okay? So the destruction of the slave's tooth rendered him a free man, and thus the subsequent injury to his eye, which was inflicted upon a free man, entitles the former slave to damages for the eye. Okay? Now, why is that relevant? Because then there was a middle set of witnesses, of 2 witnesses, and they came and said the master first blinded his eye and then knocked out his tooth. So what they were saying is there was a second set, call it the middle set, they were reversing the order. Okay. So in other words, the master need not pay him the value of his eye, but only of the value of his tooth. So why the master concurs with it is because of the middle witnesses version of events. The master is not liable to pay for the more expensive damages for the eye. Because when you damage somebody's tooth, they can still earn a living. When they are one-eyed cyclops, their ability to earn a living or even have a quality of life is significantly impaired. So therefore, the value of an eye is higher. And he inflicted that injury upon his slave, which renders the slave a free man, but it doesn't entitle him to damages. He now only has to pay for the less expensive loss of the tooth, which was inflicted after the slave was already a free man. So now, guys, if you have a look and you see that the slave owner, why would he be happy with the middle witnesses set of testimony as opposed to the first set?
Which is? What's the middle? What's
Okay.
the testimony again?
So the first set says that the master hit the slave and knocked out his tooth and then hit him in the eye. And the second set said, the middle set said, no, he hit him, the
eye first and the tooth second.
Yeah, they hit him in the eye.
They reversed the order.
Second, they reversed the order, correct.
It can be thrown out then. The testimony can be, they zomim him then.
Okay, no, they're not zomim him at all.
I mean,
what I'm asking is why would the owner of the slave be happy with, he's losing a slave.
But he doesn't have to pay for the tooth.
Exactly.
The tooth is before. Yeah.
No. So Gavin's onto the right track. So Gavin, if the tooth is worth less than the eye, and he's going to lose his slave either way because the witnesses are not contradicting each other in terms of the master's violent behavior. So the court would accept that he's violent. So that 2 sets of witnesses, the first and the second set, agree that the master is violent. And therefore the slave goes free because he hit him. And therefore the master wants to pay the least amount of damages. So if we say that I set the slave free, and then as a free man, he can prosecute for the tooth, the master has to pay less for the tooth than if it was the other way around and he hit him in the tooth first. The slave is in the free man and then sued him for the eye, which is a greater amount. So the master, knowing that he's going to lose the slave either way because of his violent behavior, whether he did it or not, they're both agreeing to his violence. He's going to lose the slave. He would rather now, in addition to losing the slave, pay the lower penalty, which is the damage to the tooth.
Yeah, sorry, I just got them mixed up. That's what I meant, but I got them mixed up.
I know you meant that. I understood that. So after you get it. So that's the issue. So since that's the issue, it all seems now the case of it is that Kevin, in that case, their testimony is not both thrown out of court. Why? Because they're contradicting each other. They're not contradicting each other, in fact, in terms of the violence of the master to the slave. They're contradicting what was damaged first. Now, you might say, well, how's that possible? Because if there's a scuffle, okay, bang, bang, how do you know which hand came first? It's not 2 separate incidents. Bang, bang, tooth, eye, tooth. How do you know? Therefore, the slave is free. They agree on that, but what does the master pay? And therefore, he'd prefer to pay less. So what the court does is they make, unless it can be proven, the master pays the lesser amount. That's how it works. That's what the Gemara says. My question is why the master doesn't pay the middle amount. If a tooth was worth 10 zuz and an eye was worth 100 zuz, why don't we subtract it to make 10 minus 100 is 90 zuz,
45.
divided by 245, and then make it 45 zuz. That's my question. Why would it go with the low amount necessarily? Go to the middle of the road. But unless there's evidence, there's a rule in Gemara that you cannot extract money from a person unless you can bring evidence. That's basically conclusive. Do you remember what we said before? Guy hits your car, or you claim a guy hits your car. You sue him. He's going to say, what's your evidence? So in other words, to extract money from your fellow, you need proof. In the absence of proof, you don't have anything. So here we would go with the lower amount because we can't go the middle of the road. Does that make sense? So obviously the master is happy with the story that he hit the eye first, freeing the slave, and he only has to pay for the lower aspect of the tooth. Now this is where the case gets more complicated. Okay, so basically, according to the scenario, the first witnesses contradict the testimony of the middle witnesses quoted by the Brisa. Okay, so according to both these versions, the slave goes free. However, according to the first set of witnesses, the master must pay him the value of the eye, whereas according to the second set, he need only pay him for the tooth. Okay, and therefore the Brisa claims, and indeed the master claims this as well, for the master is satisfied with what the middle set is saying. Why? Because the master was going to lose the slave anyway on account of the testimony of the first witnesses. He would also have had to pay for the ex-slave the value of the eye, because the order to let the slave free according to the first set was the tooth. And then as a free person, he owes the slave for the eye. But the second set is saying that he hit the eye first, causing the slave's freedom, and I only owes for the tooth. So it decreases the monetary liability for the value of the eye to the value of the tooth. So obviously the master is satisfied. And the Brisa teaches that the middle witnesses are exposed to Zomamim by yet a third set of witnesses. So they pay the value of the eye to the slave, since they conspire to deprive the slave of the larger payment of the eye that was knocked out before the tooth. So either way, the slave was going to go free. And actually, according to the Meiri, they're only paying the difference between the value of the eye and the value of the truth. And the whole truth and nothing but the truth, Kevin? The whole truth and nothing but the truth. So what we are saying is here, they owe the slave the higher value because they were meant, that's what actually happened. So what happens is that if the tooth was worth 10 zuz, okay, and then basically the eye was worth 90 zuz, then the Eidim Zomamim would actually pay, according to the Meiri, the difference between the two. According to other opinions, the full amount for the eye, not the amount between 10 zuz and 190. And the reason why the other opinions, I'm sure, just my guess, is because he would still owe the 400 for the eye. You don't deduct the 10 from the tooth. That's the only thing I can't understand about the Meiri. So the bottom line is the slave is owed the value for the eye because it was a tooth that was set free. Rava thus concludes his proof. Learn from this that contradiction is at the beginning of Hazama, the reciprocal penalty. Why? Because in this case, the middle set of witnesses was contradicted by the first set of witnesses from the moment they testified. Thus, their testimony was already disregarded before the third set came along to render them Zomamim. Thus, if not for the fact that we say that the contradiction is considered the beginning of the Hazama process, the middle witnesses would not be liable to pay the value of the eye when they are subsequently exposed as Zomamim, because they're not applicable to pay for the law of Hazama if their testimony has already been nullified according to Rashi. Do you understand what Rava is saying here, Kevin?
Just repeat. Sorry, Kevin. Rob.
No. So I'll repeat it. So what I'm saying,
repeat
Bavli,
it.
if you get this part, you'll understand. No, if you just get this, you won't have to remember anything. is Rava is saying that this was his proof from this brisa about the execution case before. Because the first set of witnesses are saying that the master hit the slave in the jaw, knocked out his tooth, then hit him in the eye. So the tooth set the slave free, and then the master owed him for the eye. The second set said no. The blow to the eye came first, which set him free, and then as a free man, the slave could sue him for the damage to the tooth, which was a less amount. The master was happy with paying less. When a third set of witnesses appeared and said that the set that said that the hitting of the eye was first and then the tooth, that was false because they were not at that place of the incident, and therefore their testimony, we should apply the Edim Zomamim reciprocal penalty because they tried to deprive the slave of his eye. Okay, and that being the case, you owe the slave for the greater amount, the eye. Now, according to Rava, this proves that the Hazamah process starts at the beginning of the process, because otherwise a contradictory testimony would throw out the case. Because what would happen is the first said that the slave would still be freed, but there would be no Kevin, they would both agree, the first set of witnesses and the middle set, that the master did damage, boom, 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 boom. So both the cases, the slave would be set free. But as far as the damage is concerned, with regards to the tooth, the lesser amount, unless proven otherwise, would be paid for by the master, and then the slave verdict would be given. And at that point, those witnesses cancel each other out in terms of the value of the eye, because they're contradictory, so we take the lower amount. So when Edim Zomamim come, according to a buyer, not Rava, they can't then make the false witnesses pay for the eye, because the eye and the tooth part of the testimony already cancelled itself out. According to Rava, it didn't cancel each other out because it just proves that they were liars from the start. So the Hazamah process is at the beginning. The witnesses don't cancel each other out in the first and middle case. So that when the third witness said that the second set could never have been there at the incident and we owe the slave the eye, we believe them because it was not cancelled out and therefore invalidated the witnesses. It just proves that the second set were lying. Whereas the buyer said he doesn't agree with that at all. That they would cancel each other out and there would be no fee regarding the penalty for the eye. But it doesn't cancel each other out. Both of them agree as far as freeing the slave, because both agree that an altercation took place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Now, okay, a buyer said no. The brisa does not refer to a case of three sets of witnesses. Okay. So hang on. So before we get there, Rava thus concludes his proof. Learn from this that contradiction is at the beginning of Hazamah. For in this case, the middle set of witnesses was contradicted by the first set of witnesses from the moment they testified. Thus, their testimony was already disregarded before the third set came and rendered them Zomamim. Thus, Rava said, if not for the fact that we say that the contradiction is considered the beginning of the Hazamah process, the middle witnesses would not be liable to pay the value of the eye when they are subsequently exposed as Zomamim. Okay. So that makes sense. So we've got 10 minutes left. But you understand the concept that Rava actually says you have to see the contradiction as the beginning stages of Hazamah. Otherwise, the two sets of witnesses would cancel out each other. And by the time the third set came and said that the second set never witnessed the event, we couldn't make the second set pay for the eye. So that proves that the first two sets don't cancel out each other, but it's just the start of the Hazamah process to show they were lying and they were conspiring. That's okay. Now, Abiah said, no, the Brisa does not refer to a case of 3 sets of witnesses, where the witnesses were contradicted even before they were exposed as Zomamim, because in such a case, since the second set was already contradicted, they could not be rendered Zomamim later by a third set and made liable to pay, according to Rashi's explanation of Abiah. So you know now that Abiah says if the first set contradicts the second, not with regards to freeing the slave, but regard to the eye payment versus the tooth, they cancel each other out. Even when you have them exposed by another set of witnesses, it wouldn't have mattered. There's no reciprocal penalty, according to Abiah. Rather, the Brisa now refers to a case where there were only 2 sets of witnesses. Those who testified that the master first blinded the slave's eye and then knocked out his tooth, and those who exposed them as Zomamim. However, the Brisa is dealing with a case where the second set reversed the sequence of events and exposed the first set as Zomamim. So that is, they testified that the master did indeed inflict the 2 injuries, but actually in the opposite order that one claimed by the first set. Moreover, this occurred on a different day and then claimed by the first set on the day they claimed to have seen the injuries occur, that they were actually elsewhere and could not have witnessed the event. So what are we saying, guys? Is that the second set of witnesses says to the first set, how could you testify to having seen the master blind his slave's eye and then knock out his tooth on Sunday when you were with us elsewhere on that Sunday? The master, what actually did happen is on Monday, did inflict both injuries. You heard about it on the Monday. You decided to lie about what happened on the Sunday, but the sequence was reversed. He first knocked out the tooth, which freed the slave, and then blinded the slave's eye. So it owes for the slave, the eye. We know you're friendly with the master, and you know word would have got out. So you were trying to get the master to pay less by claiming that the injury, the second injury was the tooth, not the eye. Because the master knew that this sort of incident would have got out about him entering a slave in the shopping center. So in that case, Abiah is saying there's only 2 sets of witnesses. But what's happening is, as a result of the second set's testimony, the slave, in fact, he does go free. The master must pay him for the loss of an eye, because obviously if the master proved that this is what happened, he's part of the process. And the Adam Zomamim, who were the first set of witnesses that seem to have been conspiring with the master, must also pay the slave the value of the eye, meaning the master pays what the eye is worth, and also, because he concurred, the Adam Zomamim must pay a separate fee for the eye. They mustn't pay it as a combined fee, because they'd conspired to deprive him of testifying that the eye was knocked out first and then the tooth. Okay? So what we are saying is, nevertheless, the Zomamim can't be held liable for conspiring to deprive the master of his slave, because both versions did agree that the master knocked out an organ that sets the slave free. It's also understandable that the master was satisfied with the false witnesses, because he's lost his slave anyway, according to both versions. He probably heard there was a rumor that was going to get out and thought he'd actually be very happy with the lying witnesses and concur with them, so he'd get out paying less damages. So in that particular case, Abiah is saying there's only 2 sets of witnesses. Okay, it makes sense, guys, too. Both Rava and Abiah make sense. Rava with 3 sets of witnesses and Abiah with 2.